Coming up on this week's A Lively Experiment, Rhode Island's Attorney General says the Washington Bridge litigation will go through his office after all. And Vice Presidential candidate Tim Walz makes a quick stop in Newport on Thursday for a fundraiser.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazenwhite Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.
Joining us on the panel, former Rhode Island Attorney General Arlene Violet, Harrison Tuttle, Executive Director of the Black Lives Matter Rhode Island Political Action Committee, and Steve Frias, former National Committeeman for the Rhode Island Republican Party. Hello and welcome to Lively. I'm Jim Hummel, and we appreciate you spending part of your weekend with us. The much anticipated litigation surrounding the failure of the Washington Bridge is in the news again this week, not only because we'll soon know who the state intends to go after legally, but also because Peter Nerona said in multiple interviews that he needs to sign off before a lawsuit is filed. You know, wouldn't it be great if we had somebody on this panel who knew the ins and outs of the Attorney General's office? We haven't heard this until this week. Did that surprise you or not?
No, Attorney General Nerona is correct under Rhode Island law. The Attorney General is really the lawyer for all the state agencies, theoretically, unless there's a conflict of interest, as determined by him or her. It's clear that McKee never brought this matter to his attention, but he theoretically can veto this. But he has the responsibility to represent the taxpayers of the state. So I think Nerona clearly is correct about this. McKee insulted him, no doubt, by not asking him. I hope he keeps that firm on, particularly Max Wistow, who's a fabulous lawyer, and I think he will. But he's just maintaining the prerogatives and responsibilities of the Office of Attorney General by saying this is my call whether you can hire outside counsel or not. The fact that he took time was very important because you have to study an issue to see whether your office has the expertise necessary, engineering-wise or whatever, which would be called, into question here to be able to examine witnesses, et cetera. So he took the time he needed to make an intelligent decision. Good for him.
One of the biggest problems is the Washington Bridge in terms of quality life of everyday Rhode Islanders. And so when talking about this issue, talking about our elected officials, it's really important that everybody becomes on the same page. And it doesn't appear like that is the reality right now. And so this really isn't the time to take potential political jabs. I really think that Rhode Islanders are looking for this bridge to be fixed and details to be announced, as well as the person who is responsible or entities that are responsible for what happened to the bridge.
Yeah, I think Peter Nerona is a very capable Attorney General, and I think it's good that he's involved in this. And it's unfortunate McKee didn't have him involved earlier. I have very little confidence in Governor McKee and how he's handled this whole bridge situation. What will be interesting on litigation to me is I would assume that some of the people who are going to be sued, they're going to have a simple defense. DOT's been overseeing us and overseeing what we've been doing, and they've signed off on everything. And I think that's going to be a significant problem in litigation that we're going to encounter is like when they point the finger back at Peter Alverdi, DOT under Raimondo and McKee and say, this was happening under your watch. We did what we were doing, and you signed off on all our reports and things we were doing at the time.
What about that, Arlene?
Oh, very important point that Steve just raised. They've already taken the statement they're not going to sue anybody who is in the wrong that belonged to the department, right? And that's a problem only because you might want to criminally prosecute them. You also want to make sure that there's not a settlement that's quote unquote political so that you could get more money from these defendants, but because they got the contracts to start with, because they're political insiders, you have to oversee the project. So I'm a fan of the fact that Nerona has stood up for the prerogatives of the office, but also on behalf of the taxpayers. And everybody should be looked at, including the people who work for the Department of Transportation that allowed this to happen.
Before I want to talk more about that, but just in terms of Nerona's involvement now, it almost like it kind of came out not by accident, but I'm wondering when the governor appointed Max Wistow, Jonathan Savage, great lawyers, they were successful in 38 Studios, why there wasn't some talk about the Attorney General's involvement, or do you think there was behind the scenes? Why the announcement
Whether it was
now?
or wasn't, he should study the issue. I mean, I would have taken the time, I would have heard it. If I already know how good Wistow and company are, so
having been on the other side of the fence a couple of times.
Well, actually, I'm on
right?
the same side of the
Okay.
fence in the Bishop case, where representing the people of St. Joseph's Hospital that had their pension state taken away from them. But you look at their competence, whatever. You're also looking at criminally what issues are going on and how that may interface or not with the civil suit, et cetera. He's a careful lawyer. He wanted to study the issue first. And just because McKee jumped the gun and didn't bring it to his attention, that doesn't mean he has to be precipitous. So I just think he's cautious Attorney General in the Rona, and that's what he should have been and is.
Probably no surprise, though, that they didn't have anybody bid. We haven't had this panel on, Arlene, you haven't been on for a while since the bridge was closed, that you have people who are potentially the objects of lawsuits now are going to bid on some project, and am I going to be served? And I mean, it's awkward.
Yeah, I mean, usually you don't want to do business with people who you know are going to sue you.
Right. It seems common sense.
Yeah, right. And so I think that's why I have very little confidence in how McKee's handled this whole thing. You don't shoot first and ask questions later. We're going to bring our lawsuit. We're going to bring, against whoever we think is responsible. You just don't do a blanket. We're going to be going after everybody. And so everyone who says, I don't want to bid on this contract, who knows? I may be the fall guy for this whole thing. So I think McKee's not handled this well at all. And the fact that, like the RFP you just mentioned, getting no bids, that's an example of people that want to even do this project because they know it's a disaster and they don't want to be involved in that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the magnitude of how many people traveled on that bridge and the fact that we had no bidders. I mean, that is a problem.
Mm-hmm. You also wonder, too, Arlene, if they know that, and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, if nobody's bidding, then you can bid the moon, and if you're the only person, does the state have to accept that if there's no other game in town?
Not necessarily. There's parameters when you put out a request for proposal, which, by the way, the Attorney General should certainly oversee, because that seems to be the case. As you know, there's already like $125 million bid beyond the money that was put out initially for the first phase of all of this. So I think you really have to study this, because I think that department, particularly since even I was Attorney General in the mid-'80s, has always been political. Decisions are made politically as opposed to what's in the best interest of taxpayers. And I praise Nerona for stepping up to the plate and overseeing this project, because I have confidence in him, that his integrity.
Last point, I think the average person looks at it and says, nobody's been suspended that we know of, nobody's lost a paycheck, nobody's lost their job. Where's the accountability?
Not only that, but think about how long it's been. Right, the Attorney General referenced
December 11th.
How long it's been, December 11th, and to the average Rhode Islander who is not looking at the news and is looking for just brief updates, to see no update, essentially. I mean, we've gotten cost of the project, we've gotten updates to everybody inside the politics game, but to the average Rhode Islander, they really haven't gotten any assurance that this bridge is going to be fixed in a quick matter of time.
But we don't even know the cost.
Exactly.
Or timeline, right?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
When you go to the ballot box in November, you're going to be asked, should Rhode Island hold a constitutional convention? It's a question voters have had to face every 10 years. They haven't said yes since the mid-'80s. Mr. Frias, you testified in front of the panel. There's a legislative panel talking about this. Now, you're in favor, but when now the opposition's lined up, and they've been pretty successful in defeating this, how do you see this playing out over the next couple of months?
Well, it's going to be a question is, are people satisfied with the status quo? And what the special interest groups in this state, who are the opposition to this, always do is they scare people. They use scare tactics because they're afraid of the change. They like how it is up at the State House right now because they get what they generally want. And so it's a question is, are enough people getting informed and educated about the opportunity that the Constitutional Convention presents? It's an opportunity to change how Rhode Island is run and reform it potentially. And, we could talk about different issues, an inspector general. We could talk about, requiring voter approval for these paw soccer type deals. So the voters are on the hook for paying for it, but they never voted for it in the first place. Term limits, line item veto, all these sorts of issues. And there's issues on the left that they would like to have a Constitutional Convention consider. And what a Constitutional Convention does, it's a forum to present proposals to the public. Nothing gets approved unless the voters approve it. So if you believe in the voters in the long run, then you should be in favor of a constitutional convention.
Maybe that's the problem. They don't believe in the voters. 70% of the people in the state polled say they want an inspector general. And I've said this before, one person's standing in the way right now, and that's Joe Sicarci.
That's exactly what it is. So that's why you have a constitutional convention every 10 years, to give people the chance to say, the General Assembly's not listening to us. They like it the way it is because they're in charge. So let's do something different.
Look, we have bodies of government that affect change, that have policy. When we allow special interest groups, as we've seen in other parts of this country, to come in and spend money to deceive the public, it's dangerous. And for the groups that are opposed to this, right, the ACLU, the unions, they want to be able to make change, but the problem is that we potentially could have a situation in which special interest groups come in and drastically change the way Rhode Island is. And if we want to change the status quo, the best way is to tell voters to vote for their elected official in which they would like to see represent them. And
so is that a no to the Constitutional Convention?
That is a no.
What do you say to that?
Look, there are special interest groups running the state right now. When Governor McKee was running for governor, hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent by organized labor to get him reelected. And in the past, in this state, 20 years ago, there was Harris Casino wanted to change our constitution for gambling interests. Guess what? The voters voted it down, although Harris spent millions of dollars. So the voters in this state are not so easily duped because they see something on TV and say, oh, I'm going to vote for that. They actually decide things and make informed decisions many times. And so I'm skeptical of this concept, like just because an outside group or special interest group is going to spend money, the voters are going to automatically approve it. That hasn't been the case always.
Go ahead.
Well, when you have money in special interest groups in politics and you allow people to spend on campaigns, you're creating a sense of manipulation. And because the campaign relies on how much money an individual has to push a campaign. And so it is not a determining factor as to the quality and the merits of the campaign. We see all the time, we see outside elected officials, outside money influence elections. Just recently in the congressional races in New York and in other parts of the country, it's a dangerous precedent.
Anyone watching this, please vote for a constitutional convention. We're now captive of already special interest groups in Rhode Island through campaign contributions. Nothing adverse happened in the 80s when we had a constitutional convention. We got ethics finally, for legislators, et cetera, as a result of that constitutional convention. The 75 people who become the so-called delegates to the constitutional convention. They run. They're from Rhode Island. You get a chance to vote for them. So the big money really doesn't count. And the bugaboo is, they're going to come in and put a provision in to ban abortion. Ain't going to happen. The General Assembly in this predominantly Catholic state, overwhelming majority of legislators were Catholic. They didn't ban abortion. It's not going to happen with a constitutional.
That was the big issue 40
back
years
then.
ago.
And it didn't happen then. It hasn't happened since, unlike other legislatures throughout this country. The Constitutional Convention is necessary. There's reform needed to be made in the General Assembly, particularly how they do business there and the secretiveness way that they do business. That's got to stop. We need an inspector general. There's lots of issues, and I think it's a false premise that big money's going to come in. Didn't happen before, won't happen now. Trust the people that you're going to vote for to be the delegates.
What issues are you, so abortion's the one we all talk about. What issues are you concerned that might be hijacked?
Well, so I'm particularly fearful of far-right amendments that are being made to the Constitution all across the country. And
such as?
Well, such as abortion, but there are a numerous number of laws that could be changed, not ones that I'm privy to exactly, but any time that you allow, again, this is whether you are on the left or you're right or you're in the middle, the influence comes as to who has the most money. And money provides interest, and money provides the access to people at the doors, in which, let's say there is a constitutional amendment in which the public may be in favor of one thing and it's underfunded compared to the other campaign. And so that's my fear, is that we have elected officials that are able to make those decisions. By creating a constitutional amendment, we're really creating an unprecedented time for far-right extremists to
But you're
affect.
never going to get an inspector general unless the people. Voter initiative is something that's kind of been controversial in other places.
Well, you mentioned that it's the Speaker of the House, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where we have to put pressure on the Speaker of the House if you are interested
People
in having
have put pressure on him. He just why would he want somebody to come and get the camel's nose under the tent on a $14 billion budget?
Exactly. Look, people in power don't change by saying please. They change under pressure. And the pressure like when I brought change against Speaker Mattiello, that was one thing. But if you want to make systemic change in this state, you need a constitutional convention, because right now the powers in the State House are so entrenched, it's not going to change. You're always like, there's this right-wing thing, this right-wing thing. In the end, nothing happens unless it's approved by the voters. okay? And again, this is a state that I don't think is going to vote for any sort of pro-life thing. It hasn't in the past. It won't in the future. I don't see it happening. This is a pro-choice state. So this is like just like a boogeyman they use to scare people because they're afraid of change.
Final question. What do you expect that legislative report? They're supposed to come up with some report by September 3rd. Is it going to be vanilla? What is it going to be?
It's probably going to be vanilla, and then they'll throw in a comment like, oh, it's going to cost some certain kind of money, to try to get people not to vote for a constitutional convention. So I don't expect much from the report myself.
Okay, we'll get back to local in just a second, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the presidential politics. Governor Tim Walz, who is now Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick, was in Newport yesterday. We're taping on a Friday morning. It was a pretty good take. He was here for, 2-3 hours and left the state with $600,000. Not a surprise that everybody turned out at Salve. It's amazing what's happened since we've had you last on.
Yes.
In the last 4 weeks, what's happened, and the whole script seems to have been flipped.
Is redefinition of what patriotism is. We saw the former president, Donald Trump, get shot, in which everyone seemed to think that the momentum was riding him to the presidency, all but a sure thing. And now we see a switch in the Democratic Party that is energizing a base in which hasn't been energized since really Obama. Right? Even in 2020, when you had President Joe Biden, there was kind of this, well, he's better than Trump. Now you have a situation
He's
in which,
the bridge to the next generation.
Exactly. And now you have two elected officials, very different, but very similar in their mission and their messaging, that is speaking to this yearning of change and everyday politics that is really reaching voters at the doors, opposed to this very corporate-like campaign that has been, really plaguing the Democratic Party and hurting voters.
Arlene?
A woman who's black is president in my lifetime? May it happen.
Yeah. So, Steve, let me just say, and for those who didn't follow, you've been a National Committeeman for years. Mm-hmm. You decided to resign your post because you couldn't support Donald Trump. And to me, that was courageous. I don't know if you felt at the end of the day. No, at the end of the day, maybe it was an easy choice rather than a hard choice. But now, as a conservative and a Republican, you're looking at the Democratic ticket, and you have some questions.
Yeah, I mean, their policies are terrible, period. When they talk about change, Harris said, oh, it's a party of change. There's a change message. You're basically continuing with the vice president of the current administration. An administration in which you had 20% inflation over the last 4 years, where you had a border policy which was a failure. And so I look at this as like what's happened to the Democratic Party is I would call it's a relief. They finally dumped Biden because they knew they couldn't win without him. So everyone's just saying, hallelujah, praise the Lord, because now we can actually win. Because before Biden dropped out, it was headed towards a likely electoral landslide defeat with consequences at the House and Senate level. So I think what we're seeing about this energy on the Democratic side is a sense of we can win. We can win. We don't have to defend Biden anymore. And I think that's what's occurred. And what's benefiting them is that I think people did not want a rematch. And the Democrats listened to it, pushed Biden out.
The double haters.
The double haters said, right. I hate both of them. The Democratic leadership pushed Biden out, and those voters that were in the middle are rewarding them right now.
I saw one prominent Republican say, I almost hope that Harris wins to put the stake in Trump, get rid of him so we can reset and come back in 4 years with a different Republican Party. What do you think about that?
I think we would be better off as Republicans moving on from Trump.
Look, we are in a crucial time in our country. We have a former president who is a multi-time felon who is associating himself with individuals who want to basically destroy our democracy. And so whether we have a candidate in Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Governor Walz, we need to make sure that our democracy is preserved and that individuals in our state and across the country are protected when it comes to abortion rights, when it comes to being able to not be criminalized, when it comes to being homeless. All of these things that we're talking about at a local level are being magnified at a national level and potentially being banned federally. And so we have to protect our democracy by any means necessary.
I'll take a smart woman prosecutor over a felon any day of the week. In the final analysis, the president has to have character. So many things materialize that are unpredictable, and you have to make decisions based on what is good for a democracy. I cannot understand why people would put in an inveterate liar that Mr. Trump is, someone who is fictitious on virtually every comment that he makes. He certainly is showing problems with repetitiveness himself and losing his train of thought. So all those people worried about Biden ought to be worried about Mr. Trump. And frankly, I am a proud Republican, but not the Republican Party on the national level that it is now. And it should be cleansed, and he needs to have the stake in his heart and get him out of there.
4 years seems like a long time. I remember when Trump was first elected, I asked my kids, on a liberal university campus, I said, what's the vibe? And they said it was like the day after we lost the national championship in basketball. Everybody was all moping around. And I told them, they were probably 18, 20 at the time. I said, 4 years goes by pretty quickly. And so, I wonder that if you got rid of Trump, and then you have the midterms coming up, right? So if you're going to mobilize for that to try to take back, depending on how the House or Senate go, maybe you got to play the long game if you're the Republicans.
For me, like I said, there are a lot of Republicans who would say right now that Trump's going to win and that the stakes are too high and that Harrison is so bad, and I understand that. My point is on the Republican side of the equation is Trump has shown consistently over the last few elections we perform poorly. We underperform. And so in the long run, I think we need to move beyond Trump.
But think about the 4 years, right? What happened during those 4 years? You saw an increase hate crimes that
16
occurred.
to 20.
16 to 20, increased hate crimes. We saw one of the most deadliest pandemics in which the former president mishandled. And we also saw one of the biggest tax cuts to our most wealthy in the entire country, leading us to the point of inflation in which we are here in this moment today. It's incredibly irresponsible for the American public if they vote Donald Trump in.
I will say though, and this is not just the reporters, it's a right-wing talking point, but I do think Harris, once the convention clears, is going to have to sit down, start having press conferences,
Yeah.
and I think she's still trying to figure out, Arlene, where her positions are. Where does she separate herself from Biden? Where does she take credit? They had a press conference yesterday for the prescription drugs, but there are other issues that I think if Trump concentrated on them could be a real brick around her neck.
Well, I heard, obviously, she has to start doing press conferences, but it's somewhat unfair. She's thrust into the middle of a campaign. She has to find who the vice president person is, et cetera. Now, then the honeymoon period's over. She has to start answering on what her policies are going to be. But I think, for Vance to criticize her for not having press conferences when Trump skipped all the all the primaries. He doesn't give press conferences either. He just goes on attack mode and how wonderful he is and the big crowds he attracts, et cetera. So to me, this is a choice in this election between picking someone who's a narcissist, and like all narcissists, put themselves first above what the good of the country is, and we saw it when he was president, the 4 years he was president, versus someone who has a distinguished career as a prosecutor, and I think the choice is very clear.
Okay, let's do outrages and or kudos. Harrison, let's begin with you this week.
I want to make sure that we are really looking at the fact that we have a situation in the state where we have multiple people that are still facing housing insecurity, right? We talk about it during the winter months, but we still experience it here in the summer. All you have to do is go to some of our lower income communities to see how the housing crisis has impacted us. There's an upcoming housing bond. And so I'm not sure if it's a kudo or an outrage, but I encourage folks to look at the upcoming housing bond that will be on the ballot in November.
Yeah, and part of the problem is there's been money available, just the execution. You got the pallet shelters that's been held up by regulation. So money doesn't always solve the problem, but...
Correct. It's allocation and it's making sure that...
And execution.
And execution and making sure that the people that are most impacted are on the forefront of what they're benefiting from.
Stephen, what do you have?
Basically kind of a little bit of a belated kudos, but to Ambassador Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley earlier this year said, the party that dropped their 80-year-old something nominee was going to win the election. And when she said that, it wasn't particularly popular with either party's leadership. Right. But it looks like right now when you look at the polling, she was a pretty good prognosticator of where things are headed.
Yeah. Arlene,
Kudos to Frias here for having the courage of his convictions. He had a price to pay when he didn't endorse Mr. Trump, so good for him. I've got to really say the Department of Health, shape up. You know, every person who has someone loved that's going into a nursing home looks at their ratings of nursing homes before they pick one. The Department of Health has not updated the site and the ratings of nursing homes, even from people that they found violated health, welfare, and safety. They didn't update when there were 2 sexual assaults in the Warren nursing home. They have refused, even though they could just copy it from Medicare, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been fined against various other nursing homes. For crying out loud, the one and only thing you should do to protect the elderly, one thing, Dr. Larkin, get on the dime, update that nursing home reference, and get the ratings correct by putting in your own stuff, as well as what the federal government has said are nursing homes that violate rights. So get with it, for crying out loud. Do something right in that department.
We could have a T-shirt, shape up. It's kind of like Gina, knock it off, right? Listen, we have just a couple of minutes left. We have 2 lawyers on the panel. The shoreline access bill was passed with great fanfare last year. Now it's in court because some of the property owners say it's a taking of the deed. Sarah Taft Carter, the judge, seems to incline, we haven't gotten the final decision yet, to kind of go with that. What is your legal reading of this?
I mean, I haven't read the decision. I don't know all the details, but here's the bottom line. There's a constitutional right to have shoreline access, but guess who interprets what the parameters of a constitutional right is? It's the judges. It's the court. It's court precedent. It's not the legislature sitting over there going, well, I think it should be 10 feet here or it should be over there.
Which is what they did.
Which is what they did. So I think that this is not going to work out so well for the General Assembly, because in the end, it's the courts interpreting the constitutional right. And of course, if they want to fix it, all they have to do is have a constitutional convention.
Oh, we add that to the list. General, what's your reading of it?
I have represented groups like Friends of the Waterfront to gain access to the public, fishermen to do the same thing. However, I think she's correct. It is a taking of the property.
Because that's in the deed when you buy it, right?
And the high tide is really what is there, and it is an unconstitutional taking. If it goes to the Supreme Court, she's going to be upheld.
30 seconds?
Yeah, like the most important thing is that Rhode Islanders should have access to the beach and the shoreline, right? And so we're talking to litigation. There's nothing that I can add that would further add it, but
Counselor Tuttle, you'd have
right,
gone to law school.
I think that Rhode Islanders deserve to have access, and that we're going to create a solution.
But it would have to be in the Constitution then, right?
Yes.
But would that override the deeds ultimately if you had for the people who own property
then
now?
there would be an issue of grandfathering.
Yeah.
That would be also litigated as it's only future, or can it go back?
Not a great time to be a real estate agent if you're trying to sell some of that property out in Charlestown, right? Okay, folks, that is all the time we have. We appreciate you joining us. Steve, good to see you. And Harrison, Arlene, nice to have you back.
My pleasure.
Arlene never lets us know exactly how she feels on this show. She's a little bit of a, she's not a shrinking violet, though, right? Folks, if you can't join us Friday at 7 or Sunday at noon, we archive all of our shows at ripbs.org/lively. There's a lot going on. The convention's next week. We're going to have a lot to recap. We hope you join us back here next week as the Lively Experiment continues. Have a great weekend.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazen White Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.